So welcome to the session, Making Sense of CGM Reports and Making Your Own Adjustments with Dr. Basina. We are so excited to have you all with us, and I'll turn it over to her.
All right. Thank you so much for being here on a Saturday night. That's exciting, pre-dinner time. So that's, and thank you for inviting me to talk. So I think it's, let me share my slides. So feel free to ask me questions. It was difficult to plan the talk because I think now there's so much technology available. There's so many different things and everyone is on totally different, either technology or non-technology or using various devices. So it's hard to target to everyone. So that's why I was kind of perplexed of what to present. So I'm going to try my best, but again, feel free to target me to what the most of the, we have relatively great group, but in terms of the number, we have excellent, I think we have 17 people. That's exciting. Wow. On Saturday night. That's great. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to do the slideshow from beginning. Okay, great. So what I wanted to talk about today is how do you review your own data? Because when you are at the doctor's office visits, or now we all join the Zoom visits or the video visits, the life completely changed nowadays. It's every 3 months, every 4 months, sometimes every 6 months. So how to make the more use of those great devices that are available now in between the visits, because it's hard, you are living with it every single day. And it can be rewarding, it can be super frustrating. So how to make sense of all the data and not to get super overwhelmed with this. So what I thought that we'll talk about some CGM chemistry and physics, just to have some understanding of how that works. I'm sure you all know, but just to give a little bit of the more details on that. What are the tips on the real-time use of CGM? How to review your retrospective CGM data. What is the duration of insulin action versus bolus on board, which is very important in making decisions about the changes. And then we'll do some math, lots of math. And my disclaimer that unfortunately not all the data that you can find in the publication. So some of the data in my personal observations and experience. So I usually tell patients, and I don't have diabetes, my disclaimer, but I love wearing CGM myself because I think it gives me so much useful information and to see what are my blood sugars after different types of meals. And you'll be surprised that for individuals without diabetes, how the blood sugars can spike. This is totally normal for the blood sugar spikes. And sometimes I get panicking, and if I eat a large fruit, I can see my CGM in 180s, 190s, and I thought, oh my gosh, and I'm checking my finger stick and it's normal, or it correlates with the CGM. But so just for you to know that individuals without diabetes can spike their blood sugar. So that's not something unusual. Who is a good candidate for CGM? I think nowadays with the available CGM technology, I think everyone is. It's just how do you prepare to see your data? That's the most important thing. And how do you review the data, what you know about the diabetes, how motivated you are. Are you prepared to see the data? Because when you're seeing the data, don't get focused on every number, every arrow on the CGM. So review it as a pattern, so recognize those patterns. That's important. Do not overreact on all the data that you see. Use this as a tool, how to make change, what to make it in future change. Not as a tool to say, oh, how horrible that looks and what did I do that day? So that doesn't really matter because it was just one day or maybe 2 days and there were different circumstances. So use it as your tool for future. What can I learn from it and what can I do for future? And then wearing it regularly. So don't get frustrated with few days of the numbers looking bad or still look at it. So don't feel like, oh, I know it's going to be bad, I don't want to look at it. So it's still useful to see what it is now and just to get to make use of it. So what is the CGM technology? This is the little tiny sensor that you put underneath the skin. This is how it looks on a cross section. So this is blown up picture, obviously. It's very tiny sensor that you wear. But it does, just to emphasize that it does estimate this interstitial fluid, right? So it's not the sugar in the blood. So it consists of several different membranes. So the outer membrane is the membrane that protects the enzyme layer from non-glucose entering into this enzyme layer. And then the enzyme layer converts the glucose oxidizes the glucose and sends the data of this oxidation into the actual electrode that converts the data to the signal and sends it to the transmitter. And then transmitter analyzes the data, and it's either manual calibration or factory calibration, depending on the sensor you wear. And then that data goes either into the pump or in the phone app or whatever device you use. So there is a lag time, right? So there is a lag time for both highs and lows. So depending on the rate of change, if their blood sugar is going high or fast up or fast down. So there will be at least 10 to 12 minutes delay time. So that can affect the decision making or what you do. And we'll talk about that. So the CGM are very accurate now. So if you think about the accuracy of the meters, the meter FDA approved accuracy of the meter is 20% by FDA, right? So MARD, it's mean absolute relative difference. So that's how we estimate the accuracy of the sensors. So the data is for most of the sensors are about 9 to 10%. And again, for the meters, FDA approved data is plus minus 20%. So sometimes we're saying that, your meter is not, your meter is accurate, but CGM not measuring accurately. Sometimes, honestly, we don't even know which one is more accurate, right? And knowing that different meters have different accuracy. Oh gosh, I'm sorry about that. That's my dog barking. I closed the door, but he came over to connect to the door. So what is the blood? So the sensor can show difference also because of the rate of change and of the lag time, right? So not because it may not be accurate, very accurate, but it may be because of just the time change in the blood sugar changing fast. Also, different meters have different accuracy, and some meters measure slightly falsely high, some meters measure slightly falsely low. So there was a study looking at the accuracy of the meters, and Contour Next had been the most accurate meter. One-touch meters tend to be measuring a little higher, and the Freestyle AccuCheck tend to measure a little lower. So whichever meter you use it sort of decide what is the actual number comparing to CGM. So the CGM measures blood sugars every 5 minutes. So it gives us a lot of data in between the finger sticks, which is great, but we get a lot of data. So we get 288 readings per day. We get over 2,000 per week. We get 4,000 per 14 days, and we get almost 9,000 per month. So how do we make sense of this data? So it's always not easy to interpret. And sometimes you're looking at your report and you're thinking, oh gosh, what do I do? And it's, what did I do to make it so low so low? So again, we talked about the delays. So there are the delays between the interstitial fluid and the meter data and whatever is happening in the blood. What's frequently happening with the CGMs is, one is overcorrecting your lows because of the data on CGM. So, right, because the CGM always would lag behind. So if you feel better, but CGM still showing low, obviously you feel nervous. So why my CGM I'm eating and I feel better, but my blood sugar still staying low on CGM, and you keep eating more. So that leads to overcorrection. So again, remember that it delays, so a 10-15 minutes delay. So it has that. And delay could be with many different delays. It could be food delay, right? Because different absorption time could be from different foods. It's the insulin lag. Insulin doesn't work instantaneously. So there is 10, 15 minutes or 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes delay with the insulin onset of action, plus the sensor delay. So how do you figure this all out, and how do you combine all of that together? So don't afraid to experiment, and don't try to be perfectionist. No one is perfect, and it could be because of all these factors. You may say, I did exactly the same yesterday as I am doing today, and my numbers are totally different. I'm sure all of you recognize this, but don't try to say that you did something wrong. It's just a lot of factors that are contributing to that. So how do you prepare yourself for your CGM review? Again, look at the reality of glycemic control. So when you start using it, and most of you already have been using it, so expect glucose to be within target 50% or less of the time. So that's not unusual, right? We will look at how do you utilize the trend data, real-time data versus the retrospective review of the data, and how our insulin and other medications are affecting that data. And then what are the targets? Again, I know a lot of you are super perfect and you want your target to be under 100 before meal, and you want under 140 before the meal, after the meal, which is great, but realize that no one need to be perfect, and there is no data whatsoever that shows that hemoglobin A1C of 5.9 is any better or leads to any fewer complications than A1C of 6.5. So again, don't punish yourself and don't be super strict for yourself. So how do we make use of the real-time data? We look at what the current blood sugar is. So use your sensor as your GPS. So what is your current glucose and what is direction it's heading to? Look and check at least 10 to 12 times a day. And use it as ability to forecast what my number is going to be. And use it for different times of the day. Look always at bedtime so you can see where the number is going. And if for pump users, it's very useful to see and how much time I have, how much insulin I actually have on board. For those who are not on the pump, there are smart pens available, which I think are super useful because it also tells you how much active insulin you have on board. Because let's say if your blood sugar is 130 and your blood sugar is going straight at this point and you have no insulin on board, then you are doing great. You can just go to bed, should be fairly safely. Now, what if you are 120 and you are going down or going down and you have 3 units of insulin on board? Then you should do some action, take some action before going to sleep, and so on. Look before the meals. Before the meals is super useful, and we'll go over some examples. But just to give you one example, for example, you are 1:30 before the meal and you have 2 errors going up. So do you need to maybe give yourself bolus earlier and wait till the arrows go straight before you add more carbs? Because if it's numbers already going up for whatever reason, stress or some being sick or just maybe some snack left over from the previous snack, not getting enough bolus, then just wait maybe 10, 15 minutes. Or if you're super hungry, then start eating, but start eating with the protein and not with the carbs, not to sort of exacerbate it. Look after the meals, but after the meals, it's great to look at, but don't use that data necessarily for, oh my gosh, this is horrible, I'm gonna correct more. So try not to overcorrect, because then realize each time you're taking insulin, it takes another 2 hours for it to peak. So by the time your next bolus peaks, when you're already at the peak, most of the food would be gone, and then you get insulin stacking and you will get low. And check when you feel strange, when you feel weird. If something is not right, so check, is it my blood sugar or it's something else that's affecting it? Or when your device or your dog is alerting you for that something is wrong. So dose adjustments make on the rate of the change. So if you are, you may, depends on the device that you're using, again, if it's an injection or if it's a bolus. use anticipated glucose value, and you can use it for all the devices, even on a closed loop system. So if you're now 130, 140, and you're showing 2 arrows up, so you know you're either more insulin resistant or something was undercounted before, and you are eating 40, 50 grams of your carbohydrates. On the device, on the a closed loop system, put a little more carbs than you are actually eating, right? Because you know that you are already going up, so you need to overcome that. Otherwise, the pump will kick in and will be giving you more insulin anyway, and then it would be slower correction than you give yourself preemptively a little bit more insulin. So variables to consider for those, and a decrease would be the similar kind of way doing it. So variables to consider: insulin onset of action, peak and duration, which we'll go over that, meal composition and portion size and the timing, prior exercise and duration and intensity of exercise, if you're on any medications that can raise blood sugar, your stress level, and illness. So I didn't put all the different errors, but you know what are on different devices, what different errors show a different kind of signs. But in general, if it's straight, then glucose are not significantly going up or down, and they're changing within 1 milligram per deciliter per minute. If it's oblique arrow up, or the same thing would be oblique arrow on the, or sort of a oblique little pointer on your Dexcom, the glucose increasing about 1 to 2 milligram per deciliter per minute. For 1 arrow going up, it's about 2 to 3 milligram per deciliter per minute. So again, if your blood sugar is 120 and you're going 2 to 3 milligram per deciliter up, so you're expecting that your blood sugar within 30 minutes would be at least 120 plus 60. So you're already trending to 180 to begin with. With the 2 arrows up, it's over 3 milligram per deciliter per minute, and the similar change when the arrows are going down. So again, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and over 3 milligram per deciliter per minute. And again, we talked about the delays. So unfortunately, we cannot, with just giving the insulin alone in the subcutaneous tissue, right? We are not able to target all of those, right? So there are other hormones that are produced by the pancreas. So that's why don't necessarily aim for 130, 140 after the meal spike. So if blood sugar usually doesn't spike by at least 30 to 50 points, then you're going to be likely to be low in the next 2 to 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours. Because this whole process is not covered by just insulin giving subcutaneously. And again, just to go over that, is that when you're giving insulin in the peripheral tissue, insulin delays absorption is about 5 to 15 minutes. Add to that, sensor delay is about 10-15 minutes. If you're using the pump, by the time your pump controller analyzes this data, more time. And then sends the data over to the algorithm. And during all this time, liver is not still seeing the insulin, because for the insulin to reach the liver, it takes about 90 to 100 minutes. So what happened during that time is the liver still keeps producing the glucose, although there's still plenty of glucose in the blood, but this insulin hasn't reached the liver yet. Okay, so try not to, so when I try to go over this with a patient, and patients are saying, oh, I spiked 60 points, this is okay, because this is what's happening in the body, right? You cannot, unfortunately, just with the insulin, you cannot cover all the functions. So we're trying to, there are many studies have been done, and we were debating of which talk to do for this session, either to do CGMs or to do adjunct therapies, because adjunct therapies, and then I'm more than happy to answer those questions, but because I'm a big proponent in that, because again, insulin alone cannot fulfill all the functions that body is doing, and that's what's happening. So if we go over a specific example, for example, blood sugar currently is 202. and your arrow is going up. So your anticipated blood sugar in 30 minutes, right, is anywhere from 232 to 262, right? So if you just cover for this 202, then you'd still expect it to be higher after the even that bolus. But again, when you're taking insulin, useful to see, yes, I am doing the more, giving myself more, but how much actually insulin I have on board from my previous correction. And again, we'll come to that. So, but if you're starting the meal with blood sugar of 202 with the arrow going up, it's pretty much anticipate that you're starting your meal with blood sugar approximately 250. So you would give yourself some correction or extra carb, or some pumps you would do what we call fake carbs. It's better to call those therapeutic carbs, right? Because it's not like you're faking it. You're just trying to do the therapy for yourself to give a little bit more for anticipated rise in the blood glucose. So another example, if your carb ratio is 1 to 10, for example, 1 unit for every 10 grams of the carbohydrates, you're eating 40 grams of carbohydrates, and your correction factor, 1 unit covers for each 30 milligrams per deciliter, and your target set is 120. So if your blood sugar currently is 147, but you see that little thing on your Dexcom, then you are anticipated to see your blood sugar in 177. So you're heading there even before your meal. So what do you do for your meal coverage? For your just meal, for your 40 grams of carbs, you would give 40 grams divided by 10, 1 to 10 carb ratio, 4 units. You have no active insulin at this time. Your correction factor, you want to be at 120. You're already heading to 177, right? So I told you it will be a lot of math. And so 177 minus 120, it's 57, divided by your 30 correction factor. So you would need to add another 2 units. How do you do those 2 units on the closed loop? You would, because you're 1 unit for every 10 grams, right? So you would add another, if you're afraid to add the whole 20 grams, add another 10 grams. So instead of your 40 gram meal, enter 50 grams or 55 grams. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Using trends by percent increase of the tips that you can use a percent increase. So if glucose is rising, give insulin, for example, and don't eat because of the, you want the blood sugar to stabilize before you actually add additional insulin. So here's your example. So you're eating here, you gave yourself 1 bolus of insulin, but it was either that meal was something that you ate in there, for example, in the restaurant, there's so many hidden carbs, so you underestimated probably. So you're seeing those high numbers and you're panicking and you're giving yourself more insulin. When that's this insulin going to peak? In another, so each bolus, you delay that peak for another 2 hours. So what happens later? You get insulin stacking and you get the hypoglycemia. And what happens with the low? You try to correct it and then you go high. So this is more like a setup for the roller coaster. So again, before repeating correction, usually try to wait for 3 hours, or if you have a pump, then the pump will use the pump as an advice for how much insulin you can actually enter. So again, early administration of the insulin before meal, it prevents those postprandial spikes. So for example, this person gave insulin right here. So you can see that probably if you look at the Dexcom, the numbers probably were heading up already, right? So if they're heading up already, then give more to begin with. And when you give more to begin with, hopefully you won't have that spike afterwards and you won't have to give those extra correction. So again, avoid insulin stacking, avoid the late hypoglycemia, and then correction again. For prandial dose calculations, if their arrow is down. So that's sort of the backwards, working for backwards. If your blood sugar is 110, and you are seeing that little thing going down, right? So you're anticipated that you are going, as we said, 1 to 2 milligram per deciliter down. So you would expect that you're actually starting your meal with blood sugar of 60 to 70. And your meal has 30 grams. Again, your insulin correction factor is 1 unit per, your insulin, that was 10 grams, sorry. Insulin to carb ratio 10 grams, and then correction factor 1 to 40. So you can do two things. You can either eat first and wait till the arrow stabilizes and then take insulin, and take a little less, right? Because you're starting with 60 to 70. And if you're 1 to 10, then give yourself, don't put 30 grams, put 20 grams. Otherwise, it's going to bring you back down again. So don't give the insulin till blood sugar stabilizes before you actually see this trend down. And as we said, consider reducing the dose. If somebody is on the who is on the pump and can get extended boluses, right? With some pumps, you're not able to do it, like Medtronic 670G is not. You cannot do the dual wave, or you cannot do extended boluses. With Control-IQ, you can still do extended boluses. If you're thinking that, oh, maybe I will forget after that meal to give myself bolus, set it up as only 10% or 20% of that bolus to be delivered now, and the rest of it to be delivered over the next hour or so. So let the blood sugar come up a little bit before you actually take your insulin. So what are we, how do we correct, again, the dose for anticipated rise? So this is the arrow up, right? So we have the rise already faster than we looked at the previous one. So it's about 2 to 3 milligram per deciliter rise. So if we want to correct for this, 220. So you would use not the 220 correction. You may want to use already, because it's your rise goes by 2 to 3 milligram per deciliter. So you're close to 300. So if you're in the closed loop and the pump is not estimating enough, you can give yourself a little bit of the therapeutic carbs to cover that difference. And if you are on the injections, then you would use your correction factor for blood sugar from 300 to get yourself down faster. And one, to get yourself down faster to avoid the frustration and to avoid next bolus or next injection, and to then insulin stacking to at the end. So again, for the insulin pump users who are using the pump for not the closed loop system, when you enter the glucose for the calculator, you can enter actually what anticipated blood sugar is. If you're using the manual pump mode, or if you're using the correction with the pumps, like with the loops, or with the pump that when you actually enter the data for correction. So for the, and again, for MDIs users, you would just calculate the dose and give yourself. And just don't stress out about it. Don't take the whole 20 units at once, and just do the math and see how much you really need. Because we see this a lot, that you're seeing this up to 20 and say, oh gosh, it's not going down. I'm going to just give myself this huge dose and see what happens. And then you get low after that. So just nothing is happening. You're not in decay. Just stop for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, calculate how much you need to give yourself, and then take that correction. And again, with each pump and with each closed loop system, that's why those talks are so hard to give now, because everyone is in the different system, and every system works a little differently for those corrections. So you can talk to providers what for that specific system, what's the better way to do it. So for downward trends or arrows, if your rate is oblique arrow down, so you're going down by 1 milligram per deciliter per minute. So do not snack until glucose approaches to the target value in the lower range, because it can turn back and you don't need to actually correct. Because if you're seeing that your error going down, but your lower target, let's say, is 80, and you're seeing it's just a oblique arrow and you're going down from, let's say, 120. If you're not on the pump, that would suspend by itself. Just hold on to see what happens, because in 10 minutes it can turn the direction and you don't have to snack. But if it goes down faster, then snack, but look at your, again, what is your projected glucose, and you can snack to prevent it. So you can take a low, smaller amount of carb, 5 to 10 grams with a low protein. So you would prevent that dropping. That's useful only when you're not in the low range. Obviously, if you're in the low range and you need to correct, then you do the pure sugar. Then you would do your glucose tabs or juice or any other sugar source that you are using. But this one I'm talking about when you're not in the low range to prevent the lows. And then look at your glucose in 15 minutes. But again, when you're looking at the CGM, realize that you still may be going down or showing that it's still on the low side, but in reality, you may be already going up, right? Because this is your 10-15 minute delay. So it may be useful at that time to check with the meter and see where you are at this point. So for the pump interruptions, I know that sometimes when it's going up, patients will just stop the pump. So when you're stopping the pump, immediate reaction would be, and that's immediate reaction for everyone. Let me just disconnect it. One is frequently you forget to connect back for some period of time. I can tell you a lot of anecdotal things. One patient would, at that time when people were actually coming for an appointment, not the video ones, would come and say, oh my gosh, I feel so horrible. I disconnected my pump because I was going low and I forgot it at home. I left the house without the pump. So there's different things happen. So in order not to forget it, just set up as a temp basal. Again, temp basal can be set not on all pumps, right? Because if it's like Control-IQ pump, then you cannot send your temp basal. But you can use your temp, either temp target on a Medtronic pump, or you can use your exercise mode, for example, on the Control-IQ. So there are various, again, different things that you can do on different devices. So the algorithm for real-time CGM that would use for most of the studies previously is depending on the glucose trend for up and down. So decrease or increase your basal rates by 10 to 20%. Again, on the pumps that you are using for the algorithm, for your closed loop algorithms, you may not always able to do it, but again, there are ways of doing it with loops. There are ways of doing it with Control-IQ. You can set your different profiles, for example, on the tandem, right? You can send your low profile when you can switch to your lower lower basal rates that are approximately 20% lower than your regular one, right? So the algorithm will work out of those basal rates. So there are various ways of doing it. Or for example, on the Control-IQ, if you're feeling that the whole day the pump just kicks me in a low range, so you can re-enter your total basal, total daily dose, because your pump is using your total daily dose for the past 24 hours, right? If you don't want the pump to be that aggressive for the next 24 hours, just re-enter your total daily dose. So again, there are different ways that you can do it with different devices. So what about the retrospective review? Retrospective review is super useful. I think that's the most useful way, because then you are prepared to look at the data, you're opening your data, you are not stressing that, oh, now it's going up or now it's going down, and you can kind of sit and think what's actually happening. So if you look at those two different graphs, right? So in the lower graph, is there any pattern on this one? Not much, right? So if you see something like that, then you would think, okay, so this is maybe something that I should just start from scratch. I should just chart all over again. Maybe I'm just do completely new basal rates as weight-based or something like that, or call my doctor and see, or CD or my diabetes educator and see what we can do about it, because clearly something is not working right. And I'm sure I'm frustrated every day with going by that. But if you look at this one, there's a clear pattern, right? So there are rise in blood sugars at night, they're lower in the morning, and then they are slowly trending up during the day. So again, pattern recognition is the most important one. And when you are looking at that, if you were, if you had like illness or flu or cold in the past 2 weeks. Don't use that the last 2 weeks as your adjustment, right? Because that would be inaccurate. But if you had reasonably okay 2 weeks with no significant trouble, with no illness, then open your Dexcom and see what actually patterns you may have and what can be possibly changed. So you can do as a basal testing. So if you would say, I don't really know what my basal are, and especially if this is the pattern like this in the lower picture, you can say, okay, nothing makes sense. So why don't I just try to first fix my basal? I'm going to do my basal testing for the next 2 weeks. And then in 2 weeks, I'm going to open my profile and I will look what's going on. I'm going to look at what my nighttime is happening. Am I going up because something is happening with my infusion set overnight? Or is it something that I'm eating in the evening and I'm maybe not under bolusing, or it's just getting slowly absorbed overnight that I haven't bolused for? And then determine and adjust. The different ways that you can use different applications for the downloading the data. So those are some old ones that we don't use anymore, but Clarity, Dexcom Clarity app that you use for G5 and G6. Gluco is a great source now. It's mygluco.com. So it's usually annual fee. It could be for Apple and Android. The good news now, thank you to COVID, that it's free for everyone now during the time of COVID. So Gluco opened their upload for free for everyone. So use it while you can. I think it's a great system and you would get really great use. Diasend is no longer available, but Tidepol is a great resource. Does not require, it's a free data download. It's a very interactive. You can download multiple devices. If you are on Omnipod and Dexcom, you can merge those two together in one program. So that would be more useful to look at than flip from one view to another. So it's really useful tool. So again, for Dexcom Clarity app is www.clarity.dexcom.com. Then you generate your 12-digit code and you can share the code for the provider, and it's a cloud-based data. It used to be that providers could see the data with 3 hours delay. They just changed it for the time of COVID. So it's less than 1 hour delay for the providers for us to look at the data, which is nice. Again, Gluco, usually subscription requires, and it's not that cheap, but now use it while you can. Again, it's free during the COVID time. And it integrates the data from meters as well as the CGMs and the pumps. And it provides you customized reports. And Tandem T-Connect has really good reports for the Control IQ, Basal IQ, and it combines T-Slim with the data of the pump data. And we talked about the Tidepol. And you can invite your provider. So the provider, the great thing about the Tidepol that I don't even need to know your login and password. Once you invited me to your team, then I can, with my login and password, I can see the data once you upload it. For Medtronic, it's a CareLink Personal. CareLink Pro is now the same as a CareLink Personal. So it's careLink.minimed.com. Also very great reports for both Macs and PCs. You can download through the ContourNext link meter. No specific software is needed. We do need your login and password for the clinic to get one-time attached to your file, but then once we connect it to the clinic, then we don't have to. But if we're doing from home, then or just reviewing the data, then we usually need your login and password. So when is the good time to actually go and review a data? When you're feeling frustrated, when blood sugars are variable, when you feel like I'm doing everything I can, but the numbers still don't make sense, when you have lifestyle change or the change in your medications, when your preparation for the lifetime events for marriage and pregnancy, or when you're thinking, why my A1C is so high? My blood sugar, when I look at my Dexcom or my sensor, don't look too good. when New Year comes and you're thinking, this year I'm going to be perfect and I'm going to look at my New Year resolutions. And whenever you decide to want to look at it. So I'm going to skip through some so we have time for questions. So for the Dexcom statistics, so you will look at the average the glucose. GMI stands for Glucose Manager Indicator, and it's more correlate with the time and range than with the A1C. But usually it's very good for the A1C data. And this is the overview on Dexcom Clarity, and it shows you percentage of highs and lows. So when you're analyzing the data, always look what is the target range setup, because sometimes we look at and this green bar is so short and we're saying, oh my gosh, why is it so short? Oh, because my target setup is 70 to 130, of course it's going to be short. So change it to 180 and you'll see way better data. When you're looking at the data, always try to stop the lows first. Like for example, on the lower graph, this person is doing amazingly well, but having consistent lows in the evening, so probably after the dinner. So stop that first, and then stop the lows early morning, waking up. And then there are really no highs here to take care of, so I think it's just the lows. So same thing would be for the upper graph. Again, look at the low patterns and then see which the lows ones you can stop first and then take care of the highs. So if you see something like that, again, what's next? I'm not even sure where I am and where do I go from there. So use your weight-based for the basal dose estimation and just start all from the scratch. So do your weight-based approximately 0.5 unit per kilo per day as a total daily dose for an average type 1 individual, and then adjust as needed. So when you're looking at the highs, you would correct by about total daily dose increase by about 5%. And again, you would look at what is causing the highs. Is it more postprandial, or am I staying high throughout the night? Right, for example, this download, yes, this was a low, but it was one night. For the rest of the nights, I was high. So you can look at what happened actually during this night. Maybe sensor actually failed and it wasn't a true low, but most of the nights I'm high. So maybe I should start with increasing my total basal dose by the nighttime nocturnal to stop that first, to waking up with a good blood sugar, and then I can figure out if my prandial and postprandial numbers will be better. So I want to get to the, and I'm happy to share all the slides, but I wanted just to give you some of the useful tips that I wanted to put in the slides. So if you're having 10, 20 basal rates, this is probably something is not right, because usually over 5 basal rate per day is not that's not useful. So if you're having a lot of different basal rate, consolidate them and see what you can do to make them more sense. So basal rates usually relatively similar throughout the day. So don't use the basal rate for the times when you're undercorrecting your meals. Use them just as a basal rates, right? So for example, if your basal rate average is 0.6, then you would have your basal rate ranging anywhere from 0.5 to 0.8. If you have 1.2, it would be between 1 and 1.5. So it usually doesn't make sense if one basal rate is 0.5 and then the next one is 1.2 and then you go to 0.3. Then the body usually doesn't work like this. So it's something is not right with the either correction, or something is not right with the carb ratio. I think this one is very useful table to have. So the basal rate changes by the percentage of the basal rate, changes by age, changes by your physical activity, changes by your carb intake. So if you are, we have mostly adults, or if you have kids who are in puberty, their basal rates could be a little higher, could be up to 55% of the total daily dose, because all the hormones are up. If you're adults, your average basal rate usually about 50% or 45 to 50%. If you have medium kind of carb intake, but if you're eating a lot of carbs, then your basal rate should be lower to leave the room for carbohydrates coverage. If you're more on the Atkins diet or very low carb diet, then your basal rate will be a little higher, total basal rates. And on a person who is elderly and thin, more insulin sensitive, again, basal rate should be lower. Once the basal rate change, it actually takes 3 to 5 hours to see the full effect of that change. And don't make a big change at once. Make it really, really slow, anywhere from 0.25 to 0.1 unit per hour. So I'm going to, if we have time more, I'm more than happy to go over some of those examples, but what I wanted to get to is some of the bolus tips. So there was
Dr. Basina, there's a question.
Yeah.
So what does it mean if your basal/bolus is 20%, not 50%?
So the basal bolus percentage is the basal, like it's usually about 40 to 50% of the total daily dose is basal, and 50 to 60% is the bolus or prandial. What if it's 20% of the basal of the total daily dose? That means that you're not having enough usually base. So there could be several different things. One, you could be in honeymoon and you could be making some of your own insulin, and your pancreas kicks in and gives you some basal insulin dose. But if you are out of honeymoon, then 20% is not enough for the basal. And that means that you're likely using a lot of corrections during the day to get yourself down, or you're using more of the higher bolus amount to cover, to get to that basal rate, to substitute for this basal rate.
So just to clarify, when you look at the total daily dose on your downloads, it should be approximately equal percents of basal and bolus insulin.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And if your basal, usually it's the other way around. Usually when we look at basal would be 70% or 80%. And then the bolus amount is small. And then when you look at the total carbs entered, that would be, for example, 30 grams or 40 grams per day. So that more clearly that 30 grams per day would be, some days it's possible, but for the most days it's really, really difficult to stay there. And again, some of the slides that I included on the protein and fat coverage, so you would add that as a carbohydrates. So to have such a small amount of carbs is not realistic. So then you would say, I probably forget to enter some of the carbs, and probably my basal is higher and covering a lot of my carbohydrates.
Okay, so then what do you do if, so your blood sugars are steady overnight, so your basals are correct, but that those percentages are still not adding, they're not equal?
And they may not be equal. If you're very insulin sensitive, you could be having lower basal rates at night. And it could be either a little higher basal rate during the day, or again, you're possibly making some of your own insulin, or you just could be an outlier and very insulin sensitive, or you're very physically active. And if you're very physically active, then you kind of burn your, so what is the basal rate covering overnight? They cover your liver production of the glucose, right? If you were running marathon during the day, or were physically active, or you have 3 kids and you were running around the kids and you didn't really have time to eat yourself, so then you're exhausted, you don't want to eat, and you're just going to bed, right? So you are sensitive and you burned all your liver glycogen, so you're not making that much of the glycogen overnight. So you will require lower basal rate at night.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Divan. So this is just the concept of the super bolus. So again, when you are eating higher carb meal, you would just enter higher amount of the carbohydrates than you're eating. And then at the same time, you're setting up your basal rate as lower. So you can do it for closed loop pumps as well. You can set your temp target, for example, on the Medtronic pump, or you can send your exercise mode on your Control IQ, or you can do different overrides on the loop. But you are eating something with, let's say, Chinese fried rice, you know, you're going to spike really quickly. So to avoid that spike, so instead of that 60 grams, just enter 80 grams, but lower your basal rate at the same time. So your first portion of the bolus would be covered. So that's the concept of the super bolus. So this is what I wanted to mention about the duration of insulin action and insulin bolus on board. So this concept is very important to know. So the rapid insulin has certain pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. And I hear this all the time. My insulin does not work longer than 2 hours. Insulin is the insulin. It works the same for everyone. You are maybe more insulin resistant, you may be more insulin sensitive, but realize when the pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamics of the insulin were done, they were tested with different insulin sensitivity. And you can see with different dose per unit per kilo, you can get different spikes and different bolus on board, depending on what your insulin duration is set. For example, if you're setting it up at 3 hours here, you can see that how much active or insulin bolus on board you still have that pump is not accounting for. And you are giving yourself extra bolus that, and pump does not, because it counts as your insulin on board is only for 3 hours. So it underestimates your bolus on board, and then you go low in the middle of the night. So I think this is the very important point that usually we see all the time.
Dr. Basina, how does the super bolus work with the Control IQ when you can't reduce basals?
You can set up your, you cannot reduce basals, but you can set your exercise mode. So your exercise mode will use your target as 140 to 160 instead of your 110 to 120.
Okay.
Right, yeah. So, and the same thing for Medtronic, you can set up as your temp target as 150.
Okay.
So yes, you cannot do the temp basal, but you can, fool the pump with the different ways. So this is just the example of the late meal absorption. So if somebody ate, larger meal and then continued to rise, so this was September 23rd, ate dinner that was higher in carbs, went to bed early, and the blood sugars continued to rise for hours. So use the extended bolus for the higher fat and higher protein meal. And again, I have those slides to add protein and fat to your carb count. So for high protein meals, increase insulin dose by 15 to 20%, or enter 15 to 20% higher carb amount that you're entering. So instead of your 60, enter 80 grams, but do the extended boluses, because of that protein and fat also will convert into sugar, right? So everything is converted into sugar except the water. So
Dr. Basina,
yeah.
What is a high protein meal?
So that's a great question. So high protein meal, per Dr. Bodie, who writes all the formulas, and you can find a lot of his formulas online. So he uses as a quarter of your weight in pounds. That's your higher protein, that was for a higher carb meal. But anything that's usually anything more than 25 grams of protein per meal should be added as carbohydrates. If you're eating 4, 5, 10 grams, then don't even bother adding it. But if you're eating more than 20 to 25 grams of protein, so add that as 10 to 15 grams of carbohydrates to a meal. So also realize that absorption from different sites of the body can be different. So the study were done. Absorption is faster from the abdomen. It's then slower from the arm, and it's even slower from the leg. And that depends on how active you are at this time. But if you're eating dinner, most people don't go for a run after dinner, right? Most people just sit and watch TV. So, and if you give yourself injection to the leg, or you're insulin infusion set, your pump infusion set is in the leg. Expect that that's absorption going to be a little slower. So take your insulin a little earlier, the bolus before that meal. But if you want it to get absorbed faster and it's in the leg, then go for a run after dinner. That would help with both. So this is more for duration of insulin action and the bolus on board. We already talked about that. So look for the hypertrophy sites. We have amazing algorithm, we have amazing pumps, but if the sites don't work, then there's no algorithm that's going to take care of it. So, right, if the insulin going into the scar tissue, the algorithm is not going to fix it. So look for the sites. And it had been shown that the sites affecting, so 53 up to 70% of patients actually develop those hypertrophy sites. So site rotations are extremely important. That's just the most important thing when you either start this pump therapy or use it for a long period of time, because again, this is your number one, affecting what your insulin absorption is and how fast it's absorbed, and some unpredicted lows we actually see from that unpredictable absorption from those sites. So be careful with that. Now, when you're switching to the different sites that you haven't used before, then you're at risk for going low. So make sure that the dose may need to be reduced when you're actually going to a different sites.
Do those sites go away, or are they permanent?
It takes a long time, years to go away. So they're not going to go away in a weeks or month. Yeah, it takes a long, long time. But use those sites for the CGM. So actually sensors work a little better in the hypertrophy sites. So use those sites, use the other sites that you're using the CGM for, use those for infusion sets, and use those sites for your continuous glucose monitoring. So just to summarize, so prepare yourself to review the data, choose the right time when you do it. No one is perfect. Anticipate seeing highs or lows. Review the patterns. Do not focus on individual numbers. Assess your CGM in conjunction with the insulin data, because just blind CGM may not provide you good information of what actually has happened. Target low blood sugars first. And if there is a pattern, if there's no pattern, like we said, start from scratch or contact the healthcare provider. Review the total daily dose, percent basal and prandial, as we talked about. Does that prandial percent correlates with your carb intake? So again, if you're carb eater and your percent of prandial low, then clearly carbs are underestimated. And make 1 to 2 change at a time and review the data in 1 to 2 weeks. Have someone count the carbs with you. It's actually a lot of fun. So some of the, I do it sometimes with the patients, then they would ask, what's going on with my numbers? And I said, why don't you just send, our dietitian loves it. So she would say, oh, send me the picture of your meal. So when I was calculating with a few of the patients, so I would say, how many grams did you bolus for? And the person would say, I calculated as 35. And I said, oh, I actually Googled everything where was the plate, and I calculated as 85. So now I know when it's really high. So have someone else or just another look at it. And even the estimated portion size, sometimes we look at it and it seems to be really tiny. And myself, I argued with our dietitian, said that there's no way that's 2 tablespoons here. I would count this as 2 teaspoons. And she will bring me the measuring spoons, and that was a 2 tablespoons. So a lot of the times visually is not as difficult, easy to look at. Make 1 to 2 change at a time, and then review again in 1 to 2 weeks. Look at your correction factor. So if your correction factor is more than 6 to 8%, that means that something was not right to begin with, and you keep correcting it. So see and try to estimate, what can I change so I won't have to correct that much? Some useful formulas that we use for self-adjustment. Your insulin to carb ratio is anywhere from fudge factor of 350 to 450 divided by total daily dose. Your correction factor about 1700 divided by total daily dose. This is actually what used in Control IQ. And 1 hour time and target adds about to your 5% in that bar that I showed you for the time and range. So each hour being in the range makes a huge difference. And again, be realistic. Don't punish yourself. This is life. Have low expectations when you start looking at your data. accept that as learning curve. Don't use it as frustration and stop doing it. And then use the situational thinking. Was it recent? What was wrong? What was different with me? And what is currently happening and what is impending in my life? Choose what you consider actionable. I can change this, but I cannot change in my life. This is what it is. And just be patient, and then you can enjoy the flat, great control. I had more, but I know we're running out of time. So I'm happy to take questions. And again, I'm happy to share the slides.
Yeah, there's actually a question that came through the chat. For Control-IQ, how is changing to exercise mode similar or different to changing your basal? You mentioned having different profiles, for example, 20% lower basal.
So if you're using your exercise mode, one, for example, there could be many different scenarios, but for example, if you're using your exercise mode today and tomorrow, but for the past 3 days, you were really not exercising and you were eating more because you had parties and you didn't have time to do any of this stuff, right? But now after all those parties, you decided, now I'm going to be great and I'm going to be running 5 miles every day. So what will happen, the pump calculates internal insulin sensitivity and it uses the last 24 hours, right? So if your last 24 hours was party and your total daily dose was way higher, then the algorithm will think that you are much more resistant, right, using that total daily dose, and it will give you more insulin. It will be more aggressive to bring your down. And it uses your current basal rate, whatever you have set. So to avoid that, you can go to your different lower profile and you can, as I said, you can re-enter your total daily dose as a lower dose, right? Because you're anticipating that you're going to be eating less, you have the New Year resolutions, and you will have much lower, you will be much more sensitive during that period of time. And I don't know if that answers that. And then you would use exercise mode on top of that, right? So with the target on Control-IQ would be 140 to 160 instead of the 110 to 120. I do see a lot in the chats for different Facebook groups and different groups that some patients are saying, I use sleep mode all the time, 24/7, and it works great for me. And I agree, sometimes if you're a very low carb eater, and eating more of the protein and fat rather than the carb, I think that would work well. So if you use your sleep mode 24/7, that would work great. But if you're a regular carb eater, then you're losing that extra corrections of the Control-IQ that it gives you the post meal. So then it's better to use the regular mode and sleep mode when you're sleeping.
Okay, and then there's another question here. Are there any tools that can go across your abdomen to tell you where there is scar tissue, so that way you know not to put your sites there?
If you see the bulge of that fat tissue, that if you kind of move your hand and you feel that there is some bulge over there, so you probably know that that's your scar tissue, your hypertrophy. Again, insulin is the anabolic hormone, right? So it makes the cells grow around it. So that's for the pump user. So try to, so the recommendations are to use one area of the body first and then move to another one. So if you're using the abdomen, for example, divide the abdomen into 4 quadrants. Use one quadrant first, and you need to go just 2 finger width or 1 inch in between the infusion sets. So you would less likely to get in there the same spot if you're going from right to left, right? Because you're likely to get very close to the spot. So if you go clockwise, counterclockwise with or W shape, whatever shape you use on one part of the body, then use that, move to the other one, and then use all 4 quadrants. So by the time you get back to that first one, it will be weeks. Right, so that gives the time for that area to heal.
All right, are there any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away.
I would like to ask, when you said about medications make a difference, and I've never been on any medications until just recently, and it seems like my ratings have been messed up, and I didn't know if it was to blame the medicine or just something else. So how do you find like what medications go mess up your control IQ?
Yeah, so the different it depends on the medication. Obviously, more commonly is the steroids that that increase your blood sugars, and it could be any form of steroids. It could be topical steroids. If you have asthma or using inhaled steroids, you already can see the rise in the blood sugar. There's certain blood pressure or blood pressure with like water pill medications can raise the blood sugars. I would just use look at the micromedics and see if the medication is affecting the blood sugar, if it increases the blood sugar. Some medications actually can make you more insulin sensitive. So some medications can more reduce or they'll go over the blood sugar, contribute to more low blood sugar numbers. But if you see the clear change after you started on the new medication, then likely that's attributed to this medication. And if this is the medication that you will be taking constantly in future, then you may just adjust your insulin dose per this because of that medication, if this medication is essential and you need to continue taking it.
Okay, do we have any other questions or anything?
That was well done, thank you. I'm an adult onset atypical type 1 for 12 years, and I'm anticipating being on the pump, and that cleared up a big portion of where I need to go from my CGM to the actual system. So I still have some questions about platforms and providers and who pays for how, but right now I'm Typool, Freestyle, the 14-day system, and pens and pricks, and so I do all of that math just guessing. So you seem to have gotten what I do mathematically.
Yeah, exactly. No, sounds like you're doing great. So what you may want to consider if you're staying on the CG with the CGM and the injections. So there is a smart pen available now called the InPen device. You can program. I don't know if you tried it. I really like it. One for even. I'm all for saving ecological and saving the, plastic and not throwing away a lot of the material. So I think those disposable pen, especially for someone who's using quite a bit of the quite a bit of the insulin dose. So you're wasting tons of the plastics, tons of the devices. So I think that the InPen is great for that. It also has a benefit that it can give you half unit increments. And it can give you the, on your app on the phone, it gives you the time when the last dose was given. You can program it as your calculator. So it can, as your pump calculator, and it will be doing that math for you, or well, at least will help you with that math. So that works really great. And as for myself, for the provider, I love it because for the app, you can just type in my fax number in your application, and on my fax machine, I'm getting all the reports, which is a lot useful to review the data than just looking at CGM without any insulin data.
How does I just assumed the InPen was the insulin pens like the Humalog and the Lantus. The InPen is it's totally different. I'm going to have to go to one of the other talks.
Yeah, so the InPen uses the cartridges for Humalog and Novolog, and it has the calculator as insulin pumps. So you enter into the calculator your insulin to carb ratio, your correction factor. You can enter
yes.
Do you have anybody that's on
if you have
Apple?
an email, and I
Apple,
can answer this question.
Do you have anybody that's on Apple 11 Pro that can use the glucose without it searching all day long and taking up all your battery, saying out of range, out of range? I want to use it like I used to on my old cell phones, but none of them seem to work with phone anymore. So I didn't try the glucose one because it was originally costing a lot, so I thought, nah, not worth it. But then if it's free now, I was going to try it. But does it work on 11 Pro, or do you know? for the Apple 11 Pro.
Does Apple work with the, sorry, I might have misunderstood the question. So is the question if Apple 11, the phone, does work with with all those devices?
Well, I've had like the 6S worked great. I could even have it programmed to say, Siri, what's my blood glucose, and it would talk to me. But they made me buy a new one, and the new one is not applicable for anything really, and it just keeps wasting my searching because it's Bluetooth and it can't find.
Yeah. So I know I learned it at the hard way. So turn off all your auto updates on your Apple phone. So that's the key. So even Dexcom, apparently they have it in their manual. It does say in a very tiny print, turn off your auto updates of your apps. So because I've had in the last few weeks, I had several patients who said, I can't use my Dexcom some reason for whatever happened. My transmitter died. So this is, so we had, it was a long time before many phone calls before we figured it out. So the last couple updates of the Apple app do not work with the current version of Dexcom. So it actually can kill your transmitter, and it's frustration, it stops working, the sensor don't work. Yeah, so and the Dexcom said, yes, but we do have it in the manual that that turn it off. And this is like tiny one-liner in the manual that is there somewhere hidden, so you can't really see it. So you need, so that's what I've learned in the last few weeks. Just turn them off, that's important thing.
Okay, well, it's about time that we wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining us. Again, this session is being recorded, and so DYF will give you access to this in the future. It just takes a little while for them to get all of the information organized. And then Dr. Basina can also share her slides with DYF, and they can send them out to you. So that way, if you want to go back and review like the math steps again, or review anything, then you will have the ability to do that. But thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Basina, for this awesome information. I personally learned a lot, so this was really great. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for being here again on Saturday night and for listening. Sorry I went too fast, but try to get through the information that I wanted to give you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
That was great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
Bye.